Well, most of you probably know by now that I was a lawyer. What you probably don't know is that before and during law school, I worked in and managed, believe it or not, pizza parlors. Seriously, I could pull beer like nobody's business and change a cake in less than a minute, make 50 pounds of dough, 20 gallons of sauce, make and toss pizzas and cook them, and dozens of other pies without burning any of them. Over the years that I worked in restaurants, I came to respect all the work that needs to be done and the workers. You see, I started out as a dishwasher. I also bussed, I prepped food, I even delivered pizza. And actually, this is kind of a fun side note. One year, Nancy and I even served food at the Emmy Awards in Hollywood. I know how hard it is to do restaurant work. It may not pay well, and it generally doesn't, but it's hard work, deserving respect. So I tend to tip well, and I leave notes on my bill like great service and thank you. And you know, most people working in your average restaurant, if they are lucky, they make just enough to cover the cost of living. For most, they pray that their day's wage will be enough to survive. And I fought hard as a manager for employee raises, and I made sure that people living off their job were scheduled as often as they could be, because I knew they needed a day's pay to live day to day. Jesus' parable from the lectionary reading today has a landowner paying all the workers, regardless of the hour's work, a denarius, which is correctly translated in the reading as a day's wage. And this is important. The landowner makes sure to provide the cost of living to give the workers that day their daily bread. Any less, and the worker will not have enough to survive. To those workers in the story, that pay would have been a necessity. It quelled hunger. It meant survival for another day. And we can hear the story as calling listeners to imagine a world where every worker is given their daily bread. Doesn't matter how much work was done, luck plays no role, enough for survival is just provided. That's justice in the story. And did you catch on in the story? Those last hired workers are not slackers. They want to work for a full day, for a full wage. Jesus himself tells us that the only reason they did not work was because no one had hired them. As day laborers in ancient Palestine, we can be sure that they were pretty much expendable to the upper class and the government, which were both the same. They were the peasant poor that the elite could and did just toss aside. There were folks just barely hanging on. No land, no steady work, no one willing to hire them. Not much hope. Without work, there's no pay. Without pay, there's no food for the day. Today's International Day of Peace. The word peace, shalom in the Bible, means more than just the ceasing of physical violence. Peace means well-being. Shalom. God is what we live and move and have our being in. So it makes sense God wants well-being for all in God's beingness. It also makes sense that the Bible claims God is love, and that love in the Bible means the desire for well-being. God is love, the desire for well-being. And the word justice in the Bible means providing that which is due. We, all of us, everywhere, are, according to the Bible, due a desire for the well-being from each other. Love. We are to love. We're to love, you see, so that we can obtain peace on earth, goodwill to all. God's ultimate aim is peace. Well-being for all. And all means everyone, whether we like them or not, whether we think it is fair or not, whether this or that political pundit or party wants it or not. Justice is how well-being comes about. It's the desire for love in action. It is a prerequisite to peace. Today's lectionary text is very, very much about peace, about well-being. We can understand these folks in Jesus' story on the threshold of being lost, truly down and out people. Their well-being is very much at risk. In the ordinary way of the world, it's highly unlikely most of them on a given day would get their daily bread. In the story, though, the risk is overcome by the extraordinary actions of someone with resources and the ability to make a difference in a heavenly way, even if just for one day, even if just for a few workers on the edge. The first out-of-work workers are offered full day's wage. Those approached later are offered work for unknown wages, what Jesus calls whatever is right. Laborers have no choice, so they work what hours they can, trusting they'll get some crumb pay. And so the landowner offers the full-time laborers a full day's pay, and to the later in the day workers, the landowner offers paying what's right. And in the system back then, not unlike today, workers worked to get paid. That's what was considered fair. The more work, the more pay. The less work, the less pay. That's what we expect in the story would be the right pay that Jesus is talking about. That's the way the world works, if it's fair. But is it fair? We all sort of agree that what's fair for a day's wage is a day's work, but we all know that life's not really fair. I mean, some people don't do much work at all and make loads of money. Others work hard at many jobs and they don't make nearly the value of their work to the culture. Indeed, many hard-working laborers are lucky if they make the modern equivalent of a denarius. Often retail and restaurant and laborers who work hard barely, if at all, make a living wage. And there are, of course, those who want to work but are either unemployed or day laborers, just hoping to find a few hours of work. A day's wage for a day's work is sometimes only a dream. People do fall short all over the world and even in this nation of what is needed to live. And if we think the shortfall doesn't happen in Ohio, we need to think again. Here's the saddest statistic I can think of, and I just saw it on Monday. Pockets of poverty lead to increases in infant death. This happens in Ohio. So much so that African American babies in Ohio are more likely to die before their first birthdays than anywhere else in the nation. Ohio, not the Deep South, leads the nation in African American infant mortality. We're among the bottom 7 in total infant mortality. And nationwide, the numbers are also disturbing. Our own government rates Serbia, Croatia, and Cuba among the 55 countries ahead of us in making sure to adequately care for all our babies so that they live. The United States is good at a wonderful country, and I love it dearly, but we do not take care of our newborns nearly as well as we should, given our vast resources and blessings. Babies are dying when they should not be because we don't provide the bottom line necessities to human beings, and that may seem dramatic, and it does because it is. Sadly, as a culture, we tend to see the lack of necessities as the baby's family's problem, not ours. And so, infants die. Jesus' parable today asks us to imagine a world that considers every single human being's income problem as our problem. He asserts the kingdom of heaven, the empire of God is like that, not like it is. And it should not just trouble us that our babies are not surviving as they should. It should matter that people are not getting what is due enough to have well-being. That's Jesus' point. And this is a matter of peace, a matter of well-being, a matter of shalom. And it may seem fair to us that our citizens are to sink or swim on their own fortune or misfortune, since that is the set of rules we purportedly live and work and get paid by. But Jesus' parable is not about earthly ideas of rules of fairness. He's asking listeners, us, to consider what the world might look like when the kingdom of heaven's rule is applied by us here on earth now. People getting their due, their daily living portions of resources. It's everybody being allocated what is needed to live. Have we created an economic reality, liberal, moderate, conservative, or libertarian, where all are getting enough? Or to put it in the very real, unacceptable, negative way of my example, are babies dying because under our present system of living, the well-being of all is not paramount, so that peace is our number one objective. Our culture's way of doing things doesn't ensure to provide adequate income, education, health, and nutrition for all. And the consequences are real. The richest nation in the world is on the 56th rung for infant mortality rates. The state we live in has the 7th highest infant mortality rate in the nation, and the color of a baby's skin leads her to face a higher risk of dying in this state than in any other. Now, I'm not an economist. I'm not a politician. I'm a Christian clergyman and theologian, and speaking theologically, letting families go without enough is sinful. It leads to shameful, heartbreaking realities. It leads to injustices, and it leads away from peace. Like I said, justice is about getting what is due. And while the human economic rules that we live and read, I may say that what is due is what you or your money have worked for. Jesus, God's idea of what is due, is something altogether different. It's about peace, well-being for everyone. And Jesus told the story we heard today because his listeners were often nobodies, poor, worthless to the culture beings, expendable, who did not have well-being. Their being was not well. Jesus' story offers hope to those who can barely, if at all, find work. And it offers instructions to all the rest of us, everyone else. God's way is not about human rules of fairness in the workplace, but about justice. Everybody getting what is due in our day-to-day living. Ultimately, it is about all getting what they need to survive. Babies and children, teens and adults. Stephen Patterson, in his remarkable book, The God of Jesus, has these questions and observations about the parable of the vineyard worker. It's a lengthy quote, but it's just magnificent. He writes, what does a human being have a right to expect from life? Fairness? Hardly. What is fair depends on the rules by which we agree to play, whether in fact the rules are followed. A day's wage for a day's work. You're paid what you're worth. If you don't work, you don't eat. It all seems fair enough, but it really never works. Rules are not consistently applied. Does everyone really work a day for a day's wage? And what are you worth? And how do you eat if there's not work? This parable is about work, worth, and eating. If one still labors under the illusion that the workaday world is a fair and just way of making sure that all have the basic means to life, then the story will be deeply disturbing. It is unfair. But more than that, if taken seriously, if it deeply undermines the quid pro quo system of human relationships that govern our economy. Who among the workers will show up the next morning at the first hour? Everyone gets the same regardless of how much work they do. Will anyone show up at all? But what if we define the question differently? Patterson writes, in the empire of God, what does a human being have the right to expect? A denarius a day. That's enough to eat for one day. You get what you need, what everyone needs, no more, no less. In the empire of God, it's not what a person earns, but what a person needs that is due. Could that be a basis for an economy? Yes, but only if one is willing to reimagine radically the basis for human relationships. Jesus imagined an empire of God in which the basis for human relationships would be the mutual assurance that all would have enough of what they needed, not what they could earn. Human worth is a given. It does not depend on one's ability to offer something of value to someone else. To secure one's existence is a rough and tumble world of brokage and competition. In the empire of God, the means to life are offered to all freely as a gift, regardless of what has been earned. Dr. Stephen Patterson. That's radical stuff. Usually today's Bible text is used to preach about how God's grace is doled out equally in heaven to those who come to Christ, whether they come in the morning of life or come along before night falls. And there may be truth in that understanding, but it misses Jesus' point in the parable that the kingdom of heaven's way of doing things on earth, God's justice, is that all get what they need to make it through each day, whether they have earned it by human standards of fairness or not. Jesus' point is that we are all to have enough, no matter what. And that may not be our standard, and we may choose to dislike it, hate it, reject it, or fight against it. But justice, fairness by Jesus' heavenly standards is that no one is supposed to worry about having enough work, having enough pay, having enough worth, having enough health care, having enough to eat. God's justice means basic necessities are provided to all humans. For most in the world throughout history and today, for many even here in Ohio, this is just about as good a news as ever could be hoped for. But imagining God's justice, heaven on earth, not easy. Hearing Jesus calls, not easy. Figuring out how to do it is difficult. Following it is hard stuff. And our task, regardless of whether we accept it or like it or not, is to find a way to do as Jesus' landowner does, to give us all this day and every day our daily bread. Enough to survive. May we one day accept that task, figure out how to pull it off together, and bring about peace, shalom, well-being on earth to everyone.